Hey guys, my name is Mark. I am a student advisor for Berklee Music, and today we are hosting an open house with one of my favorite guitar professors from the main campus, and also who has authored a course for us online, Thaddeus Hogarth.
It's great to be here.
What we're going to do today is, Thaddeus, we're going to talk a little bit about funk and R&B guitar.
Sure.
And what we're going to do is the first 20 minutes, Thaddeus is going to do a presentation, a little bit of a lesson. And then the last 10 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to have questions from you guys. So feel free, like throughout the presentation here, you can shoot IMs and let us know what questions you have. And at the end, we'll catch up and we'll shoot them over to Thaddeus.
Great.
Yeah, man. So thanks for being here with us, obviously.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
So I study with Thaddeus at the main campus, and he hipped me a lot to the power of pentatonics, which is something that is near and dear to me as a blues player and near yourself.
Sure.
So what you wanted to do is we wanted to talk about how we can use those to our advantage in all genres and all music.
Sure. Well, the course is specifically about funk, rock, R&B soloing, the course that I authored. And one of the things that I like about the pentatonic is the accessibility to all, it's like all cultures. You know, we love the pentatonic. You know, you can go anywhere in the world and you can find it in Chinese music, you can find it in basically music all over the world. What I find in the context of R&B and funk is that it's a very accessible sound. You don't necessarily have to use it, you know, in a traditional way, the way like most people, if we're in the key of A, we use an A pentatonic, you know, right, whether you're playing rock, blues, or country. What's great about R&B and funk is that it's a little bit on the progressive side, so you can actually sort of use the pentatonic in ways that's not traditional, and you can get some more, what I call more expensive sounds, you know. And by that I mean, without going into the territory of jazz, without becoming a jazz player, you can use the pentatonic in ways that make you sound a little more progressive, but still not stepping outside of the genre of, in this case, you know, funk and R&B. So we'll do a little demonstration, and I'll start off with just sort of minor sounds, you know. Usually if you have a minor chord, let's just start off with a G minor, and I'm going to use my little freeze pedal here to sustain a G minor sound. That's my organ. There we go. Now, most people would use a pentatonic on this chord, whether it's a groove or a vamp. from the root. One really easy thing that you can do is instead of thinking about it from G, we're going to go up a fifth to the note D, and now we're actually going to play a D minor pentatonic. Now, it might look like I'm still playing around the position of G, but just to be a little clearer, I'm going to actually play it right here. And listen to how this sounds over the underlying G minor harmony. It sounds right? It sounds like I'm still playing in the same key. It still sounds right. Now, you might be saying, well, why does that work? When you do that, when you're in the key of G and you play a D minor pentatonic, what you do is you get a couple extra what we call tensions in jazz music, and specifically you get, in the key of G you get 9, which is our A, and you get 11, which is our C, and it just gives you a color that's slightly different from playing it from the root, which would be as opposed to slightly different color. Now you might ask, well, how does this become more intuitive? Well, I would say the first thing that you should do, and first thing everyone should do, is, since pentatonic is such a big part of guitarists everywhere in the world, I would say you have to learn all 5 positions of your pentatonic. It's one of the scales that you absolutely have to learn. And in the key of G, really quick, this might be a review for a lot of people, but I'll go through the 5 positions really quickly. Now that's starting on the root. This is starting on the flat third. Continuing on the fourth. Sorry. Flat 7. Now, most people probably already know that. Getting to know those positions is fundamental. And then after you get to know the positions, you might say, well, it still sounds like I'm playing a scale, How do I make it sound a little more musical? Well, I would say, first of all, memorize those positions. Secondly, I would say what you can do is play what we call permutations, or we can basically we can vary the scale. It can be in a consistent way. One of the very popular ones that you probably heard is a can't even do that simple. Let's try a little more complicated one. Or even fifths.
Are there examples of guitar players, just so people out there who may not be familiar with this?
With a pentatonic?
Can you think of players that do a lot of that they can maybe
goodness, right off the top of my head, I can think of players like, even outside of the genre of R&B and funk, I would say Eric Johnson, Bonamassa, cats like that, who use a pentatonic a lot in their playings, and if you permutate it, it can sound like so much more than those 5 notes. Mm-hmm. Those would be some great examples of great pentatonic permutators, Mm-hmm. So I would say after you have an idea and a good handle on the scale, and once you've memorized that, then to get into this idea of creating these new sounds that we call superimposing to get more expensive sounds, then you can just think in terms of one simple thing, like let's say we're playing a G minor chord, then you can think 5. And if you think 5 in the key of G minor, then you're thinking D. Mm-hmm. So instantly, just from that one thought, 5, D, you get 2 tensions. Mm-hmm. You get 9 and you get 11,
And it does add a lot of color to what you're doing, absolutely.
And without actually going outside of the genre, do you know, like, because if you're playing, certainly if you're playing a song that's more in the way of country, you don't want to start playing bebop licks on tensions and stuff like that. It just sounds a little out of place. Yeah. And so that's the quickest one. And I would say the one thing to remember is that this is for grooves or for progressions that are static. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say look at every piece of music and every time you see a minor chord, this is something you can do. For the most part, that particular superimposition, which is up a fifth, is going to work. But try and, sort of use it more for a situation where the groove is continuous and you're trying to create interest. So you can go back and forth from playing, say, over the G to thinking D, for a second. And just with that thought, you can create a different sound.
Are there no-nos in terms of like the scale degrees of the pentatonic scale where you shouldn't start the pentatonic?
Well, I would say that for minor, well, we'll cover the minor. I would say the minor, a very, very common superimpositions that I use are 2, which gives you a Dorian sound. When you take that same G minor chord, and then instead of playing 5, which would be the D, I'm going to play 2. So listen to how this sounds now. Now, that gives you a Dorian sound. So let me do that again. A little bit stronger there. As opposed to 5. As opposed to 1. Two. So you can literally go back and forth between these sounds. And someone will say, well, if I take all of those 3 superimpositions, I just wind up with a Dorian scale. So why not just play a Dorian scale? Well, I think it's the power of your intention in saying, I am deliberately going to play this scale that gives it this kind of sound. Like, I'm going to play Dorian sound. I'm going to play on the 5th, So those are some really simple superimpositions that, since especially in R&B, if you're soloing over funk R&B, funk rock, a lot of times it's over a minor groove. You just might have a, Let's try that again. Loop. Loop refuses to function at this time.
Technology's awesome.
Technology doesn't work well. Okay, all right. Let's forget the loop for a lot of times in R&B. You'll have the same groove. Mm-hmm. You'll have like say a G minor 7 groove.
We've all done that.
When I do it old school, like actually play it, where you have this kind of groove, and it's constant, and then you're called upon to solo over this, and you're like, well, how do I create? How do I create interest over this groove? Just imagine this is a rhythmic groove, What I'm doing right there is going back and forth between all 3 of those superimpositions, just to create a little bit of color. Wish I could get my loop functioning again here. I don't know. Turned it off, turned it back on. Anyway.
That's all right. Technology's awesome.
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of people as guitarists, we've all kind of sat on those vamps forever.
Yep.
And the whole jam band circuit of guitar players out there.
Right.
That's all it is. You're vamping. You're vamping pretty much when you're playing the harmony part. So for the minor 7, that's the idea. You're talking about the 5th scale degree, the 2nd. What if you're playing major 7? Like, what if you're in like more of a playing a standard, or you're vamping in a standard?
Right.
What if you're using pentatonics in that?
Exactly. Well, over the major 7th kind of sounds, why don't we go to, let me lay down a little major 7th chord here. So we have a C major 7th organ sound. And so here are my options on the major 7th. Of course, as you know, if we're in the key of C, we can always use an A minor pentatonic. And the reason for that is simple. It's the relative minor. So if I want... So you can certainly use, one way that you might think of that is, it's the key of C, I'm going to use 6. So I'm going to use the A, you know. That always works. You can get away with that using the pentatonic again, very familiar sound. Another one that I use a lot is using 7, you know. So I use, listen to how this sounds. Let's do this here. So I'm going to use 7 now. Sounds a little bit out because you actually get a tension 11, which is actually, most people will equate that to the Lydian sound. Now that one you have to use really very sparingly, you know. You can get away with it over funky stuff. One tune comes to mind. I think it's a group called So Live, Eric Krasno, who uses a lot of pentatonic stuff too. Funky group, great group. I'm a big fan. And there's one song, I think it's called Reverb, actually, now that I think about it. The groove is something like, how's it go? Where it's just 2 major 7th chords, and it allows you to sort of stretch it a little bit. I would say, you know, over that kind of situation, I would definitely use the 7 permutation. A lot of times I use 7 superimposition at the end of a tune. Sometimes it's kind of cool to throw that in there.
What makes you choose that?
What makes me choose decide? Depending on how far I want to stick my elbow out. Do you know what I mean? Like if I'm like if I really, you know, if I decide that I want to sound a little bit on the edge, you know, and I think it all depends on the music. You know, a lot of times this we're talking about improv right here, and it's all determined by sort of the moment. Like if the improv of the moment decides that it's okay to do that. Some genres might be, I think, a little bit more welcoming to adventure. Do you know? Like if you're playing a country song, I'm sorry, you have to play country licks. Otherwise, everybody's going to look at you and say, "Why are you playing a sharp 11?" You know. However, but you know, certainly in R&B and funk rock soloing, it does invite some adventure, and it's like, hey, you want to sound out for a little bit? You can even throw some jazz stuff in the middle of a funk solo without getting kicked off the stage. You know. So I would say, for me, it's totally determined by a combination of things: the feeling of the moment, of the moment, as far as improv goes, the respect for the tune, you know, because you really have to respect the tune. And certainly, in my case, I'm the singer, so I can play whatever I want. But certainly, if the vocalist is like, "Don't step on my toes," and don't play something too weird because I'm the center of attention. But the other major permutation that I wanted to talk about is 3. So I use, for minor, we went over 2, 5, 1, 2, and 5. And for major, I use 3, 6, and 7. You know, and 3 sounds like this. So again, we're going to do a, you know, C major 7. And there we go. Now I'm going to play an E minor pentatonic over this. So that's, you know, a little bit more of an inside sound. So usually for happy major sounds, I use 3 and 6. You know.
That sounded Kras.
That sounded definitely very Eric Krasno on that. You know, 6 sounds very Santana.
Right.
You know, like it sounds very much like Santana. You know, as opposed to. So those are some of the main things, because I think most contemporary music, especially major 7ths, minor 7ths, occasionally dominant 7ths, a good 5 chord or something like that. But I have a whole other set of things that I do over that.
I think too, a lot of the people that are watching this, maybe that are hip to pentatonics, maybe are thinking Stevie Ray or whoever, Clapton.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about playing in that matter in sense of like bends and all that. But I did want you to really quick, because we're getting to the questions era. Just give them a little taste of the bending stuff that you were talking about. Yeah,
I will. First of all, those demonstrations of the pentatonic, as you said, are pure pentatonic. They don't have any bends in them. A lot of people think of this. They think of that as a pentatonic. That is a pentatonic scale with bends, which is what I'm going to talk about really quick. That's also another feature of the course that I have written. So the things that we just spoke about are pure pentatonics, no bends at all. If you start bending, then you're creating other scales, because that's the whole point of a bend. You're bending a note, you're pushing it up, and it's increasing in pitch. So you're ostensibly adding a note to the existing 5-note scale. So a lot of times if you bend a note, it becomes a 6-note scale, Also within the course, we get into the bends, which is, I'm going to demonstrate real quickly. We take all 5 positions of the pentatonic, as we mentioned. We take all 5 positions of the pentatonic, and usually I start off, both in the college and in the online course, I start off with the bend, which is the simplest and most common of all bends, which is taking the 4th degree of the scale and bending it up a half step to the flat 5. Now, real quick, the disclaimer is that you should really be the judge of your own physical capabilities. I have a Strat, I have 12s on my Strat, and I can bend them. Usually when you start getting into bending, you do want to really listen to your body and not use strings that are too heavy, because you don't want to wind up injuring or tendonitis or any of that kind of stuff. So I would say if you want to get into bends, start off with light gauge strings and then work on things like intonation. And so real quick, you take the basic scale. When I get to 4, which is actually the 3rd, the C, I bend it up a half step. And then continue up the scale till I get to the other C and bend that up a half step. So it'll sound like this. Now, ostensibly what we're doing is adding a note, and that note is traditionally known as the blue note. And so basically that's what we're doing. We're creating the blues scale. And real quick, this is the quick version. But you do it in all positions.
I think that stuff's cool because it can turn into licks. Like it can turn into a lot of really neat stuff that people haven't discovered yet.
Exactly. And it's a whole system of bends, where we take those basic positions of the pentatonic that people are already familiar with. You take that and then you just change one note. I have something in my course, I think I have something like 6 or 8 bends, that we do. And we do them in all positions. And then there are different combinations of bends that you can do. And then if you memorize them in the scale patterns, then eventually, in the middle of a solo, you're like... Do you know what I mean? And you do all the bends.
And if you don't know all 5 positions of the pentatonic scale after you've gone through all that stuff,
Oh,
You should know it. I mean, I did that class, and
Yeah.
it'll teach you all those positions. You're gonna know them like the back of your hand, and it's good. Stuff just starts filtering out in your playing.
Yeah.
But let's get rolling with some questions really quick.
Sure.
So Steve wants to know. He says, Thaddeus, who were some of your influences when you started learning to play the guitar? Was it R&B and funk that started it?
Actually, yeah. I mean, quite honestly, I mean, I'm not going to say my age, but I was heavily influenced by the music of the 60s and 70s. I would say that I came to sort of musical maturity back in the day when they had this thing called melody. No, I'm just kidding.
I still love the 60s and 70s music. I mean, I grew up on that stuff, and I'm 32.
I was so into songs and lyrics and stuff like that. So if you just go through the list and Motown, people like Marvin Gaye, the higher players, Stevie Wonder, people like that. Curtis Mayfield. I discovered Jimi Hendrix in probably like 1973, like 3 years after he died, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And then I heard about this thing called Woodstock, and then I heard about this thing called this band called Santana, So I grew up listening to all of the sort of the classic rock. I mean, back then we were listening to American Top 40, and I grew up in the West Indies, and I grew up in St. Kitts, and we would turn on American Top 40 every Sunday, and we'd listen to the countdown from 40, and I would listen to all of it, and you would hear an R&B tune, you'd hear the stylistics followed by, some class, Led Zeppelin or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Well, slightly different, but but it was amazing back then. There was just all these genres, American Top 40, and so within it, all of a sudden this guitar came out, and I would say people like Jimi Hendrix, Carlos Santana, even like Peter Frampton was all over the airwaves, so I was like copying licks from him. Then I heard of this thing called the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it was a mishmash of a lot of things. At the same time, growing up wanting to be people like Bob Marley and listening to Peter Tosh play guitar and how they sort of incorporated the guitar into that genre. They incorporated the rock guitar into the reggae, And so I grew up with all of those, that whole melting pot of influences. And then I came to Berklee, and then I was like, West Montgomery. I've never, so at one point it went straight from sort of like the more classic rock kind of things to, I need to learn as much as possible about jazz, and then sort of making the journey back again and realizing that because I'm a singer and because I love my stuff is heavily influenced by the 70s, that that's the kind of stuff I want to play and perform, but I want to try and incorporate. That's why the pentatonic stuff is so great, because it allows you to incorporate some of the jazz elements without actually thinking about it. And it's an acceptable sound.
Yeah. And I think too, you can't skip out on this, like the Isleys, like, and these.
Oh goodness, yeah.
You play with them now.
Oh yeah.
And it's
well,
like
I did do a thing. Yeah. Well, Isleys was a big influence.
Stuff.
I mean, Isleys, Ohio Players, Earth, Wind and Fire. I mean, those were all of the people I grew up, listening to. Gosh, I mean, the groups were so. Yeah, Ernie Isley was a big influence of mine.
And now, like, this cat has played with a lot of these guys now.
Yeah, I got to play. Ernie played with my band. Last year he came and did a residency at the college, and he sat in with us for a whole show. It was I just couldn't believe it. I mean, like, I remember being an island boy listening to the Isley Brothers and this amazing wailing guitar in the context of R&B and funk, like which I mean, cats like Ernie brought this in to, Ernie Prince and all these guys. Before that, your guitar part was, and then all of a sudden they bring this new sound in. So I was heavily influenced by Ernie Isley.
That's cool. That's cool, man. Then I got another question. So this relates back to what we were talking about, the minor 7 vamps and pentatonic. So he's asking, this is great to clarify this too. So when you say play the 2 over G, you don't just start the G minor pentatonic scale on A. You actually are playing A minor pentatonic.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when I say play the 2, I mean like you're in the key of G minor. You know that because say you wrote the song or they just said the keys in G minor or whatever. The tonality is in G minor. That's your do. What you do is you just move up a whole step, and that becomes your tonality. So in the key of G, you move up and you play an A minor pentatonic, and that gives you the automatic tensions. In the case of moving up a whole step, we actually get 9, 11, and 13, as tensions. Dorian sound. Be careful with that one because and I just have to say really quick, Dorian content, that you can only use that superimposition where Dorian content is acceptable. That might mean something to some of you, it might not to some of you, but basically it has to be a Dorian-friendly progression in order for that to work. That's the trickiest superimposition.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have time for one more, I think. I think this is a good question in general, and I'm going to paraphrase this. So this guy's a trombone player who also plays guitar. And within the context of a funk band, I feel like the most important thing you need to understand is knowing your place in the band.
Exactly.
So like you don't want to be playing really out stuff when you're trying to play for a Motown tune or something like that.
Exactly.
So what would your advice be to people who are guitar players out there, or horn players, doesn't matter, but taking these concepts and knowing when to use them and knowing when not to. I know that's an instinct thing and it's hard to explain, but can you kind of give a little bit of your experience?
My experience has been, really quick. I think the genre, and actually I'll recap on something that I touched on earlier. It all depends on who wrote the music. For me, if I wrote the music, I feel like I have those visions in mind when I write the music. Like I wrote this piece and I want it to be sort of on the edge. I want it to be funky and traditional, but when we go to the B section, I want it to be a little bit on the more jazzy outside section. So the first and foremost thing is to respect the tune and the instrumentalists that are playing with you. You should be aware that if your keyboard player is playing minor, but he's playing minor like more of a natural minor kind of sound, then what you do with your Dorian superimposition might sound like an elbow to his ribs, But ultimately, I would say that try and play as inside as possible, which means I'd say, stick around 1. If you want to step out of that and go to 5 and come back to 1 and maybe go to 2 if it's acceptable, or if you're in a major key, maybe just do 6 and 3, and then come back to 6 because 6 is sort of very
safe.
And then if maybe once in a while if the solos are going out, it is something that you learn over time that you sort of have you have to respect the material and I think artistic license is one thing. Well, hey, I'm an artist, so I want to do this to the tune, but to use the extreme example, if you do that to a country tune, and the artist is looking at you and saying, "I asked you to take a solo. I didn't ask you to go and play some weird thing."
There goes your paycheck.
There goes your paycheck, exactly. And so I think it's a question of listening and respecting the underlying music, first and foremost, and the ensemble that you play with, because especially in the context of R&B and funk, it is it's all about community. It's like we're making this music together, versus, hey, I'm over here, just like a basketball team. You know what I mean? We're making this together, and we need to work together as a team. And this is my job over here. And if my job of doing this, and I take a solo, usually when you take a solo, you have a little bit more license to do some stranger things, but if it steps too far out, then it upsets the balance of the overall thing. So I know that's not a specific answer. I can't give you a mathematical answer on that one, but I would certainly say that just respect the music and use your ears. Ear training.
He's big on that.
Ear training.
Know when to burn and know when to not burn.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Well, guys, I think that'll be it for us. Thanks, Thaddeus, so much for spending time with us, man. It's good to see you again.